Hey everyone, Phreak here. Welcome to my patch 8.8 rundown for League of Legends. I want to quickly give up that I am pretty sick, and so my voice probably sounds weird, and I'm probably going to try to get through this a little bit quick so I don't blow my voice out too badly past what it already is from coughing all the time. Okay, so 8.8 is the MSI patch. That's the one we're going to be on. Mid-season is going to be like a mix of like 8.10, maybe 8.9, 8.11. Like it's going to be kind of a trickle. So, I guess look forward to that. Anyway, 8.8, let's talk about it. Revert slash rework to LeBlanc. This is going back to her 2016 form before the 2017 rework ever came in. The old passive, the old QWER, all that fun stuff. And what I chose to do for the math is actually compared her to the pre-rework state from 6.21 to now. As a quick bit of context for LeBlanc as a champion back in those days, she had basically zero changes through the entirety of 2016. From 6.1 to 6.22, there was nothing between those patches. But she was overall the number 8 most picked and banned mid laner in pro play, and had the highest win rate of any mid laner in the top 10 of picks. So across 261 games where LeBlanc was picked, 54% win rate, was the most successful of any mid laner in the top 10. Thought that was interesting. So she was a successful, very successful pro mid laner. And as LeBlanc is, not that great in solo queue. So we're going to compare what's coming into 8.8 to her old form back in 621 before the rework ever came in. And Q does a bit more damage up front. The Q2, talk about the 2 mechanic here. This is counting the front and back half of the sigil. So Q does more damage, same ratio. W, very similar amounts of damage, in fact the same. The cooldown though is a bit better, there's less level incentive. Now that said, LeBlanc, back in this day, used to max W first because it was the wave clear tool. If she does that, the mana cost will be worse after rank 4, but the cooldown is better for the first 4 ranks as well. Otherwise, a pretty similar ability, and even then, 10 mana difference is not that big of a deal. There's plenty of good mana options. The E is more backloaded. It is 0 to 20 less damage up front, but a flat 20 damage better if you can complete the chain, which is the general trend of this rework, is that she can burst, and she's not punished for going fast, but more of the payoff is in the extended fight. And that feels like a fair sort of breakpoint to me. Then we go to the ultimate changes. The R has a worse ratio for the W, but the same base damage. And then the Q and the E, when ulted, are in a similar situation where they do less damage up front by 30%. The ratio is down by 30% or 33% as well. The 2/3 is good, but if you can complete the full spell, you can break the ult Q mark, or you can chain ult E and get the second half of it. The ratio is the same, and the damage is up very slightly. So she does keep a little bit of that backloadedness, but she is much more upfront than she is on live in 8.7. And, you know, pretty similar upfront to the olden days. The big difference being that basically if you W into QR, you are going to give up a 0.28 AP ratio and 30-60, or 90 damage. But as recompense, you get 40 damage up front on the Q being popped. So even a level 9 LeBlanc who just goes in and goes QR and backs out actually does more damage than before on base value, but has a lower AP ratio. All right, so that's just there. I want you guys to know it. Next up, a mini rework on Ahri. All her abilities are getting attacked. Changed in some way. The old Q move speed is moving to her passive, although it requires hitting a champion twice within 1.5 seconds. That means a double hit on Q. It means 2 hits on W. It means 2 hits on R, which you can be R into R. So it is reasonably easy to get the move speed. That said, the move speed is less intense, but lasts 3 times as long, roughly. So less intense, lasts longer. You can't get it for free just by queuing behind you. And in fact, the cooldown, being 9 seconds, is longer than the old Q cooldown, which is 7 seconds. So it is less often, less intense, arguably harder to achieve, but it is longer duration. And it doesn't require using your Q, which, not really a positive. Okay, so she moves slower. I think in most cases, she moves slower. Except in the case of running away, where you can trigger W while running, W will double hit, you'll get speed, you can keep running. That's the only other case. Or if you're going for like a hard chase, you can like R at them, hit W, none of them stop your movement at all, and then you get the haste to walk faster forward, and you can like have some chase down stuff going on. There's some like subtle usability buffs, but in general, although the 3-second duration is quite nice, I'm still pretty sure you are generally not covering more distance. Okay, whatever. Next up is the Q Health Restore. This is identical, flat value and ratio-wise, to the old passive. The only difference, though, is that your W and E don't charge it up, but your W and E also don't spend it on the 2-hit ability. So, the move speed is similar, though arguably a bit worse. The healing is basically identical, though a little more constrained when it's gained and spent, but I would argue that's probably on net a buff, just because you can't waste your heal. Next up, Foxfire is cheaper. Now does priority targeting, which is a huge big deal. All right? Yeah, you can nerf the move speed, but this is a really big deal. Auto-attacking and landing charm guarantee that Foxfire goes after your target and at more range. It is much easier now to Foxfire your opponents. This is a very big deal for Ahri. It is an ability you typically max second. That's going to matter quite a bit. Next up is Charm, which is losing some base damage once you rank it up more, and losing a pretty substantial amount of AP ratio, but it informs a 20% damage amp. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, here's the table. Basically, if you learn Charm at level 2, it does 6 less damage, which is an 8% damage cut, but here's this column right here. How much incoming damage has to come in for this to be a buff instead? And if you're at 30 AP, it's 30 damage. And considering you're going to be at rank 1 of the ability until level 14, it's impossible not to do 30 damage with your other abilities. Because 20% of 30 damage is 6 damage and makes up for it. Now, of course, the more AP you have, the more the AP ratio nerf matters. And so, okay, if you have 400 ability power, you must have 400 damage coming in. This is pre-amp. This is just, does your Q do 400 damage? Congratulations, it's buffed. And at 400 AP, everything does 400 damage. So basically, Charm is buffed. It pretty much can't not be buffed. This is almost impossible for this not to be buffed. Unless you were somehow going like Charm into Runaway all the time. And by the way, Charm, I'm pretty sure, does not self-amp. Yeah, this is a damage buff. Cool. Next up is Spirit Rush, which is losing 10, 20, 30 damage, but getting a 0.1 AP ratio. Here's that. Again, 30 AP. How much AP to equal? 500 AP is my example endgame build. That's like 4 major items, basically. 1,000 is generally overkill. I stopped including that. And yeah, it takes 100, 200, or 300 AP to buff the ability. Now, at level 6, you don't have 100 AP. At level 11, you might have 200 AP. This can be a damage nerf for a significant portion of time. Now, again, you have Charm that is a damage buff, and the W changes are a buff. But yeah, eventually you get to the point where your AP kicks in and you do more damage. Overall, these changes feel like a small buff, but I could be really underrating how valuable the old Q haste was, because it was definitely meaningful. And if I'm undervaluing how big this power cut is, then I'm wrong. But outside of that, these changes are all on net power buffs. Spirit Rush is neutral to negative. But this is a buff, and this is a very big buff. I'm going to guess Ahri's win rate is a pretty similar spot afterwards, though, because I do think this is a nerf. I think she's going to be pretty similar in win rate. More damage, less kite ability, and that's probably correct for her. All right, one more thing is they're keeping up with the Irelia rework, and so they're buffing her armor by 3, buffing Blade Surge damage to minions by 10% additively. Flawless Duet gets a bug fix, but ours damage and cooldown are going down. The context is basically her early laning phase is weak, but her late game power is a bit too high. Okay, so here's her armor and how durable she was before versus is now. Pretty meaningful 2% physical durability update. I mean, 31 is a pretty low armor value, to be honest, so I think she could use this. Cool. Better against physical matchups, that's nice. As far as Q, multiplicatively, it's 6% more damage than before. That's pretty nice. This will sometimes help you get the reset on a cast menu that you weren't going to before. So this does more than just help last hitting. It can help actually unlock your combos, and that's a good thing. And then we have the big R table. R is an AP ratio exclusive. There is no AD ratio. But here you go. It's like an 18% damage cut to the first half of it. It's like a 40% damage cut to the second half of it, which is pretty substantial. But such is life for her. And the cooldown is about 1/6 longer as well. But end of the day, I mean, the whole point of R is the CC and setting up for your Q resets, so it's not the end of the world that it does less damage. But yeah, is going to be a hit to her late game team fighting, absolutely. And the hope is basically that like her laning phase is better enough with the Q and the base stats that she makes up for it anyway, which I feel like will come close. I expect Irelia to keep gaining win rate because people are going to get better at the champion, and that's probably fine. Nerfs to Azir, damage to non-primary targets with the W going down. Here is the table. Not until level 16 is it as good, and even before then, it is a pretty substantial cut. I plugged in the base soldier damage values, not counting ability power, because it didn't matter that much. But here is the damage cut. It is definitely quite meaningful. Down, down, down goes his wave clear. Braum losing some armor growth. By the way, Braum has obnoxiously high armor growth. I just want you guys to know that. It's pretty ridiculous. Also, his resists granted by W going down. I want to point out, W gives resist to himself and to his teammate, and it gives both a flat amount and a percentage of Braum's bonus armor and MR. So in the real world, these nerfs aren't quite as bad. So first up, here's how much armor he has and his physical durability as a result. Yes, this champion really had 124 armor at level 18. He still has an obnoxious amount of armor at level 18. This seems almost excessively high to me. But that's what he has. Next up is the amount given by his W. W typically is maxed last, so it is a full 7.5 armor and MR cut off. For the durability percent, I looked at his base stats, his armor, and his MR, averaged the physical and magic durability together, and split out these numbers. He is going to lose about 4 to 5% of his durability before he buys other armor and MR. And I want to point out, unless he runs conditioning, there is no armor and MR in runes anymore. And unless he gets a Ninja Tabby or go towards a Righteous Glory or a Knight's Vow or one of those other armor items, which of course he will eventually do, there is no bonus armor on the kit because he's going to get his Sightstone first for the first 2,000 gold and then buy Boots 1 and buy a Control Ward and buy Potions, and then he'll buy an Aegis later on. So a lot of these early game differences are just accurate. He really will have exactly 5% less durability while the W is active. Now, while it's down, it's, going to be no different. But hey, there it is. Also want to point out that this durability percent also is rolling in these changes here, where it's comparing 8.7 to 8.8 base armor plus buffs given. All right. Next up, Galio getting another swing of nerfs. What's interesting is there were tentative Galio nerfs to his max HP. Galio has obnoxiously high health at level 18. It's like top 3 in the game. It's really, really, really high. So I thought that was going to be an okay nerf, but they chose not to do it. They chose ult cooldown, which is more pro based, which I think is also fine. This is basically up to Twisted Fate levels of ultimate. Twisted Fate and Karthus, the global screw your team fight abilities. I think that's fine. So pretty meaningful hits here. 11 to 33%, up to pretty high values. Cool. Yeah. Galio is a really big team fighter. Good roamer. This is a more pro-based nerf, which is where you want to nerf him. So good. They should have done this last time instead of for the Q. Oh well. Next up, buffs to Graves. Health scaling going up. Graves now has well over 2,000 health at level 18. That is quite high, especially for a ranged champion. Certainly he is pseudo-range. He's like Urgot, where he's kind of a juggernaut, but either way, pretty substantial health. Well over 2,100, which is kind of nice. Our cooldown also pretty substantially down. 60 seconds is very, very short, so that's a lot of activity. This, I think, and I said it before, that the Graves buffs should be enough to have people try to play him in Pro, and I assume it's happened to some degree. I think really this time, though, Graves will see scrims and we might see him at MSI. I want to also take a quick aside to talk about the fact that I have spoken to so many players, pro players, who have said X-Champion is just not viable. I talked to pro players, or I've had friends who talked to pro players at Worlds last year who said flatly, Caitlyn is not viable up until the Chinese teams brought out Caitlyn and won. I've talked to NALCS pros, or have friends who talk to NALCS pros, saying that Trundle is not a viable champion right before Trundle Jungle showed up into the meta. Pros do not always know what's actually good. Graves could be sailing by everyone and they could be missing it entirely. And we'd never know because they don't tell us. This is not to demonize pros. They have very hard jobs and they've got to economize their time. They can't be right all the time. I'm certainly not. I'm not right all the time either. Anyway, I think this is good enough for people to give Graves a shot in scrims. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I feel like this should be totally viable as a champion. Gianna gets nerfs. She's not really seen in pro play much anyway, but she gets nerfs to solo queue because busted as champion. 5 flat move speed off, 5 damage off Zephyr. Not very big, but considering her strength in solo queue is being abusive in lane with Zephyr, this is still pretty useful. So this is all the math comparing 8.7 to 8.8. If you max it first, it's a pretty small damage hit to the tune of exactly 5, basically. If you max it second, the percentage of nerf is a bit bigger. Some people do max it second because they want to put points in shield. Generally speaking, maxing W first is the better build. And she's a little bit less abusive and a little bit slower, so she can be maybe caught just a little bit more easily. Cool. Want to point out real quick that even though she has very low move speed, of course she has a bunch of movement speed hastes on the kit, but when Zephyr is on cooldown, she loses the bonus move speed from Zephyr, and thus is actually maybe slow enough to catch. All right, nerfs to Kai'Sa's health regen, and I feel like I dislike these changes. And so I am someone who really enjoys base stats as a concept. I enjoy that champions can have different base stats, have different strengths and weaknesses, but I also like that champions' base stats make sense for who the character is. So I went and looked at every champion's base stats in League of Legends. Okay, 5.5 is one of the lowest health regens in the game. The champions with lower health regen at level 1 than Kai'Sa are Soraka, Mordekaiser, Warwick, Gnar, Maokai, Nunu, Rakan. And then also Sivir and Xayah. With the changes, right? Outside of Sivir, Xayah, and now Kai'Sa, all of those champions self-heal, or in Gnar's case, gain a bunch of stats when they transform and essentially heal for that. So Kai'Sa is at I self-heal tier for health regen. And to me, that breaks my expectation of the rules of base stats. She has Nunu health regen. Nunu heals himself on an active. She has Mordekaiser health regen. Mordekaiser heals himself and shields himself on an active. She has Soraka health regen. Soraka heals herself by landing Qs. Kai'Sa, yes, likes to buy Death's Dance, and yes, likes to buy Gunblade sometimes. Like, okay, there are, like, playstyle thoughts here, but it feels bad to me that the nerf was this instead of nerfing something like her armor. Because her armor, her base armor, is 33. Remember when we scrolled up to Irelia, who is literally melee and had 31? Kai'Sa has more armor than that champion. I mean, not anymore. Now Irelia has 34, but, like, I would have liked her base armor to be like 29 or something so that she could be poked down by Caitlyn and not had just like this weird like, well, you've got new health regen. Congratulations. Like I like stats to make sense for the character. Now, whatever, it's not the end of the world. Her health regen growth is okay. It ends at about 15, which is still a bit low, but I'm not going to wax on too much about that. But here's her health regen before and after. Something is wrong with my math, whatever. Either way, pretty substantial cut to her health regen. Okay, I'm sorry. Apparently I typoed. I put 5.2 instead of 5.5. So this numbers are not quite as bad as they're on this table. That's why it's actually 14.8 up there. Anyway, whatever. Those are the numbers. As far as the Q nerf is concerned, here you go. You come in with about 10 attack damage if you have like absolute focus in a Doran's Blade or something. She's probably going to go Doran's Shield every game, so 1080 is maybe a little bit high, but whatever. In lane, this is a completely negligible nerf to her Q damage. It means basically nothing. If you get 100 or 200 bonus attack damage, it could be up to a 5% damage nerf by the end of the game. Of course, you can't have 200 bonus AD at level 1, so it's a 5% damage nerf by end game. Not the end of the world. It matters, it exists, but okay, slight damage cut. Pretty substantial and meaningful laning phase hit. She might have to really consider going Resolve secondary for Second Wind as a result. Or maybe Chrysalis, but I mean, I think Kai'Sa will still be viable. She's certainly exceptionally strong on live right now, so good she's getting nerfed. Okay, fine. Next up, nice little buffs to Lissandra. Flat 10 mana off her Q. 10, 5, and 0 seconds off Frozen Tomb. These are very, 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 very small buffs, but we're starting to see a few mage tops in pro play, like in Korea, so cool to see more of them enter the fray, I suppose. I think Lissandra tends to be a bit interesting in pro play. That said, this is not enough to make people turn their head and go, let's start scrimming Lissandra, so I would expect her to not show up in pro play. I don't think there's a reason to pick her. I think Lissandra would have made sense in a Kai'Sa metagame. If provided Lissandra was a good champion, Kai'Sa jumps backline, you ult her, you kill her. But QSS is so prolific anyway, and Tahm Kench is so popular and all this stuff that, like, the actual metagame is not good for Lissandra. If Skarner weren't popular and Tahm Kench weren't popular, Lissandra would be better by comparison. Next up, pretty substantial buffs to Nautilus. Base mana up by 66, base attack damage up by 3.5, Dredge Line cooldown down by 4 seconds because you max it last. It's a 4-second cooldown buff. These are all really substantial, and Nautilus is a very underperforming champion, so that's cool to see. Here's his mana pool, really, really substantially up. Want to point out that blue buff mana regen is based on your mana pool. However, Hunter's Talisman is based on your base MP5 stat, so that's not changed, but blue buff is for Jungle Nautilus. Of course, getting 3.5 attack damage, also pretty nice here for Nautilus. This will help his, or this shouldn't say regen, that's a typo, but his attack damage, of course, quite a bit higher. That's a good thing to see, and I think he deserves to have 60 or more attack damage, being that he's a giant anchor-wielding tank. His Q cooldown, again, going to be 4 seconds better for basically the entire game. Really substantial cooldown difference there, so cool. Big buffs to Nautilus. I like it. I like it a lot. Nerfs to Ryze as a perennially powerful mid lane champion. He did gain a lot of power with the new Mana Flow ban that came out in 8.7, I think it was. And I think could use some nerfs as a result. I think Mana Flow ban was a straight buff to Ryze. Turns out 250 max mana really got to the Mana Mage. Who would have thought? So either way, small nerfs to his early wave clear. Spellflex costs more mana. There's a chance he gets to run out of mana as a result here, but I think not going to mean all that much. Worth pointing out that E gets maxed pretty late on because of all the things. The fact that Q has 6 points in it. E's actual bounce damage went down, so there's less points to max it early. So you're going to have this level of cost difference for quite a while. Ryze will still see pro play, and he'll still be bad in solo queue, unless you're really good at the champion. Nerfs to Scion. Basically, oh, that's weird. Okay, so my math's going to be off here. The notes I was reading beforehand had a flat damage added to make up for the nerf a little bit. So here's what Scion Q damage looks like if you max it last, which currently people do. But part of what's in this math is there is a 10, 7.5, 5, 2.5, 0 flat damage buff on the Q from what I was basing my math off of. That changed or didn't get translated into this title. I'm not sure which. One of these two things is right, either mine or this. Either way, still a nerf to his Q damage as time goes on. Trying to give players an incentive to put points in Q if they want Q to deal damage. This affects his wave clear a little bit. Q does deal reduced damage to minions, so it is not insanely massive. E and W still going to do the heavy lifting there, but it exists and it's some less damage. Scion will still be a very big pick in pro and quite strong in solo queue. Nerfs to Tahm Kench. Devour no longer gives move speed at all while carrying friendly champions. He typically never carried teammates towards enemies anyway. The context here was that often, as it sort of says here, often just let him run fast while escaping. So this is, I think, a pretty big deal, actually. And this is a pretty big deal for the laning phase. Here's how much health he's actually getting. Because you didn't gain gray health 1-to-1. There was like a ratio attached to it. This is how much health he was actually regaining back after getting shot at. And E tended to be an ability people maxed last. And because it was an ability maxed last, the 25 becoming 15% is a much bigger hit early on. There is now much more likeliness that Tahm Kench might choose to max E second. Most frequently, it was last, but people make a bigger choice now to maybe max this one second. Because there's a bigger difference now. Flat health nerfs to Talia, as well as early game cooldowns to her Q. Talia, a pretty big but not ubiquitous mid lane mage. It felt like to me she didn't need big nerfs, but I guess they're just kind of tapping down some of the top end ones. I didn't think she really needed it that badly, whatever. But health going down closer to 2,000 seems pretty reasonable. And the cooldown on her Q for the first 8 levels up a pretty substantial amount, a pretty meaningful amount. This definitely hurts her level 1 or 2 early bullying, pushing you out of lane, pushing you into your turret. And also makes me realize 11 seconds is a very, very long time. If you want to scrap with Talia, as soon as she cues the wave, you've got 10 seconds to fight her with no cooldowns available. That's pretty nice. Next up, really, really interesting changes to Varus. I like this a lot. I like that Varus is supposed to live somewhere between an auto attacker and an actual sort of mage, like sniper marksman. And so the new W active, we're going to talk about right here. New W active has a long cooldown, but makes your next Q deal additional damage equal to a bunch of their missing health, and that damage can be up to 15% on max W with a full charge Q. That is a meaningful amount of health loss, especially considering you're going to do a bunch of their max HP from popping W triggers, a bunch of damage from the Q itself hitting people. That's exciting. Pretty big nerf to the passive. I want to point out the passive has 2 portions. There is a flat attack speed amp, and then also an attack speed ratio, which is what we're looking at here. Like when he kills or assists the champion, he got, I think, 40% bonus attack speed, plus 30% of his bonus attack speed is filtered back in as well. And of course, it's half that for minions. Cool. Also some flat damage off Blighted Quiver. Okay, wonderful. Well, I did some notes. I did some math. Here's how much actual attack speed Varus would gain. And I simply threw in his base stats and Precision Primary's 9% attack speed as the base math here. If he has a Rage Blade, if he has Berserker's Greaves, he has a Wit's End. These numbers all change, of course, but this is what it is. Against minions on base stats, it's like up to a 3% loss in total attack speed. In total attack speed, by the way. Against champions, it's up to a 5% loss in total attack speed. Just counting base stats. Now, if we get really into the weeds, I looked at what is the maximum possible gain his passive could have given him, based on the attack speed cap and how much attack speed you have to buy. If you had 160% bonus attack speed, killing a champion would have put you at attack speed cap. After this nerf, you are 8.5% slower than before. This nerf right here, instead of going to cap, you're 8.5% below cap in total attack speed. At that 160%, if you killed a minion, you are 5% slower. So that's what that means. Because the more and more attack speed you buy, keep in mind, the more likely you are to overcap your attack speed, which means there's no nerf at all. And the less attack speed you buy, the less this nerf matters at all. So basically, it is in the most extreme case, the little peak, 8.5% less total attack speed. That's unlikely to be reached because you're going to overcap or you're going to undercap, and it'll be less than that. As far as the W damage, I picked his basic attack damage added in this here. It's a 7% damage hit in the early game, of course. Peters off over time. It's not as big of a deal later on. Honestly, I don't expect Varus to lose much win rate. This does matter to a certain degree. This matters to a certain degree. I mean, if you're losing, 5% of your attack damage and 5% of your attack speed, those are both meaningful. Excuse me. They're definitely meaningful. But this is a really, 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 really nice thing. And I'm excited to see some number of Sniper Varuses come back because I think it's really cool. All right, next up, changes to Vi. Loses some armor, but gains some armor growth. Gains some health regen. And then gains cooldown on Blast Shield in the early game. Gets better cooldown on Vault Breaker in the early game. Gets better mana cost and excessive force. Okay, so here is Vi's armor. And her physical durability as a result, the break even, the buff point is level 13. So for the first 12 levels, she is less durable against physical damage. That said, her health regen is 11% higher. Also, her passive shield is coming on about 20% more often. So she technically takes more damage, but recovers more health and shields more health to greater degrees than the armor nerf. Thus, Vi is, I think, unequivocally healthier in the jungle. She is also unequivocally better in lane matchups, especially against magic damage lane matchups. So, that's cool. As far as Q cooldowns, she often maxed it first, so after level 9 it doesn't matter, but still does mean something in the early game. And her mana cost, as an ability that was often maxed second according to online stats, still going to hold on to a nice mana cost buff here as well. So hey, has more mana, has more abilities, tanks damage better. Cool. And lower cooldowns are almost always just funner, so that seems quite nice. Next up, nerfs to Xayah, and even bigger nerfs to Xayah's health regen. And these are once again different changes from what I was doing my math against when I was looking at the internal patch notes. So this is different from what I saw, unfortunately. So the base health regen I do have, and that's here. 6 becomes 5, and once again, 5 flat health regen is just substantially low. It's super low. Her armor, I think, is also 33. Yeah, she also has 33 armor, which we just saw Vi have 35 go down to 30. Xayah still has 33. I still like the idea of, look, if you're not a self-healer, you can have some level of health regen. How about just lower armor instead? And that, I mean, makes sense anyway. But whatever. It's still an early game nerf to a champion that has short range. They're trying to exacerbate the early difficulties. One thing I will say, as far as health regen is concerned, is it buffs the desire to have a healer. Like, if you still have good armor but bad health regen, then lifesteal and healers like Soraka and Sona and Nami are more valuable because they will shore up that weakness in a meaningful way, and you've still got a bunch of armor to, like, make those heals and shields matter. Basically what this means is Xayah and Kai'Sa, and it's why I said earlier that I'm, like, mixed on whether I think it's a bad change or not, is if you really do allow yourself to say, okay, these champions have uncharacteristically bad health regen. They've got Sivir, Xayah, Kai'Sa health regen. Okay, well, this means that to get through a laning phase, you should be running an enchanter. If you want to run Xayah or Kai'Sa and have a sick late game short range AD carry, then bring a healer. And that to me is compelling. That to me is interesting and compelling as a way of cultivating team compositions, making champ select interesting. When someone first picks Kai'Sa and they don't pick the support, and you ban Soraka, Nami, and Sona, it's like, ooh, good luck surviving landing phase now. We got rid of your healers. That's interesting to me. That is interesting from a draft perspective. Base attack damage by 2. Cool. I didn't do the math because I was looking at the wrong notes, apparently. Rek'Sai, some nice bug fixes on burrowed stuff. Swain, little bug fix with phase rush. That's cool. Basically, Fury regen's a little bit nicer. Small nerf to Archangel Staff, notably not Seraph's Embrace, only while it's Archangels. And if you're looking at, these numbers, 2% less mana to AP is every 1,000 mana is 20 less ability power. It is not going to break your back. It is a pretty small deal. Honestly, as soon as you have Archangels, you're stacking tier twice as fast, so you'll get to Seraphs really quickly. This is going to take like 6 minutes. For 6 minutes, you have 30 or something less ability power. Because the item's going to give you like more than 900 and your champion base that's like 500 something. Whatever. You're 30 AP down for 6 minutes. Not the end of the world. Whatever. Buffs to lethal tempo is pretty cool. Plus 10 to 30%. I actually have some internal context on this that is not in the patch notes. Their goal is kind of to say, hey, lethal tempo and press the attack are pretty similar users. There's someone who's going to attack you several times in like the early to middle part of a fight. And they're kind of hoping that lethal tempo is the late game choice, and that press the attack is somewhat more the early game choice. That hitting someone 3 times in laning phase is a chunk of damage, but lethal tempo is on for the team fight, and I mean, absolutely is going to deal more damage as lethal tempo than like fleet footwork will. And the numbers are probably high enough that I will consider actually running lethal tempo for the first time in the history of League of Legends. And hey, this is really good, especially for double BF sword AD carries, or champions who just don't get to buy attack speed much normally. Like, think about champions like Kled, who are going Titanic, Hydra, and Sterix Gauge, and Black Cleaver. And yes, Kled has violent tendencies to give him some attack speed for a little while, but at a certain point, that's going to wear off. And hey, still has 200 AD, can make use of lethal tempo, as weird as that sounds. If you're playing Lucian, you probably do want press the attack, but it's also nice to consider, hey, what about lethal tempo? What's also interesting, if I'm going to go even farther in this one, if you're a champion like Twitch, who can really get away with not going 2 Zeals, but instead could go Essence Reaver because turns out your R cooldown is important, and your E cooldown is pretty good too, and raw AD is a good stat, imagine lethal tempo Twitch, who like goes into stealth, pops W, presses R, and then just gets nuts amounts of stats, and just sprays the crap out of people with the R and lethal tempo running. This is a really good way to smash team fights. Think about Jinx, who, what's great about lethal tempo is it lets you break the attack speed cap, so if you are a double zeal user, it's not even that bad. But Jinx often has to sit in rocket form with very little attack speed, because you don't have minigun at all. And you're sitting on BF Sword Hurricane, and you're like, man, it really sucks having only like 45% attack speed at level 9. And lethal tempo goes, haha, have 75. And you're like, wow, this actually feels good. So at a certain point, lethal tempo can be really, really good on crit marksmen. Or people who don't buy attack speed at all, but have a lot of attack damage, like hard juggernauts. I think lethal tempo will finally be viable as a result of these buffs. Small buff, Dark Harvest, VFX stuff, ARM tooltip update, that's great. Here's a big change. Sweeping Lens is gone, it's now only oracles. Holy moly. Well, now your supports can never forget to switch Trinket, because it starts the game with it. So that's cool. This generally is going to mean you are less safe checking brushes. You can no longer cuck a Shaco at level 1 by killing his boxes over the wall. It is going to be, I mean, flat out, it is less safe to clear brushes. However, you can clear more brushes. That's cool. I like that, actually. I like that actually a lot. Yeah, just kind of a lot. I like this change. In general, I'm happy with it. Other big thing is switching trinkets is less punishing, which is also really cool. So that's going to be nice to see. Switching trinkets maybe a little bit more often. Supports can feel good about their oracles alteration, existing at level 2 and whatever. Or 4, or whatever they want to pick it up. This is great. Super love this change. We'll probably have some level of pro ramifications. Maybe it actually further buffs tank supports because, I don't know, they can stay melee with their oracles alteration and feel better about it. I don't know, but whatever. Changes the home start buff I'm very happy about, by the way. You're no longer zipping super fast when your opponents invade you. It doesn't fall off so quickly. However, it falls off instead of when you cross the river, but when you cross the outer turret line. So it will fall off once you get into your jungle, which means if you invade and you're awesome people invading like awesome people, you're not going to run into that Janna who left the base late, sees you, and then turns around at 700 move speed and gets away. I'm very glad this change is happening. As someone who likes to invade, that's awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome. Cool. Bunch of bug fixes. Warwick Q could double cast. Cannon Minion Gold actually now scales past 87. I want to point out I did not know that in the previous patch rundown. But what was interesting is because the Cannon Gold did cap at 87, the overall amount of gold per minion wave and over time was actually the same as in 8.6 because there were so many more cannons that they were worth enough more that the gold values ended up being pretty flat. Now, absolutely, the amount of gold in the game has inflated. There is now definitely more gold in League of Legends if you farm waves than before. This raises the value of split pushing because there's a lot of income to be had there. This raises, once again, the value of having a relic shield in the late game because you're going to get a lot of money off those things as Braum or whatever. And that's cool. So, sweet. More money. And I'm okay with like more money being in the game and game times going down very slightly as a result. That's fine with me. Most of these seem to be just visual updates, little VFX stuff, so that seems fine. Conqueror Varus, courtesy of MSI. Badlands Baron Rumble gets some chromas. And Unlucky Hextech Crafting had a gemstone bug. All right, that's the patch. Quick TLDR, let's go. LeBlanc rework is about as powerful as she was before the rework ever came through and was a very successful pro mid laner. I expect her to see some play as a result of this. I expect her to be an MSI. Ahri, definitely going to be slower. This is a nerf compared to her old Q passive. Everything else is arguably stronger. R is a close call. Probably very similar win rate. Irelia, 3 more armor, better Q resets, worse R, whatever, she's still a very strong champion. Azir power down, still going to be pro viable. Braum armor down and W armor and MR down, still going to be pro viable, still going to be solo queue viable. Galio, R cooldown, pretty heavily hit up. Now much more niche pick in pro. You've got to really want to play Galio to play him, but I think still viable, but niche. Graves, definitely good enough for solo queue. I'm going to start playing him in like my jungle games when I get jungle. Seems good. Going to be really tanky late game. Should be good enough to be pro pickable as well. Janna, still going to be too strong for solo queue. Still going to be very, very rarely played, if all at pro play. Not that I think range supports aren't viable. Just people don't really like to pick them that much and not that much Janna. But whatever. Again, I think she's still going to be too strong in solo queue. Kai'Sa, still going to be very strong. But there's a chance you have to pair her with a good babysitter because this is a meaningful amount of health regen going down. This health regen growth is substantially down. Lissandra probably won't see pro play because people won't think about her. These buffs are honestly very, very small. Will probably remain slightly weak in solo queue. Will probably not be seen in pro play. Nautilus, really substantial buffs. Definitely will get another look for pro play, maybe as a jungler or support more than anything else. Because they have more use for Dredgeline in jungle and support than they do in top lane. I think there's enough top lane tanks anyway, but with Sion going down a little bit in power, maybe we see Nautilus, but I doubt it in top lane. Rise, E nerfs and mana cost, whatever, still going to see pro play, still weak in solo queue. Sion Q nerfs, still going to see pro play, still probably the number 2 tank behind Ornn as a result. Tahm Kench, pretty substantial cuts here to his regen and to his Devour. I think will remain a viable and probably sought after pro support. I am curious what the pro landscape will look like if we just see Nautilus just replace one of these tanks, or if we actually go full circle and we're like, you know what, screw it. Let's just play range supports. Braum, Tahm Kench both got nerfed. Let's go somewhere else. I doubt that, but it can happen. Talia will still be pro viable. Actually, it was decent in solo queue, about 50%. Will be slightly weak in solo queue, but still should be fine. Varus, non-trivial nerfs. But one of the big things is people were playing AP Varus a lot, which, I mean, I guess still these nerfs matter. I don't know. I feel like Varus overall, though, will, at the end of the day, end in a stronger place as a result of these changes. He will definitely be in a more interesting place as a result of these changes. But will probably be powered down on day one because his builds might have to adapt a little bit. And his skill order might have to adapt a little bit. Changes to Vi that I think basically just are buffs. I guess they're trying to buff her for top lane as well as jungle. Yep, Vi's a bit stronger. Should be healthier in the jungle. Should be healthier in lane. Cool. Xayah. Yep, gonna continue to go power down. There were already Xayah plus Rakan duo nerfs, and we kind of saw Xayah Rakan be a bit less popular in pro play as of late. Xayah is one of the most effective solo queue AD carries and will be less so now. Should be very much bullyable. She does not have any good defensive tools to not be poked at. You should be lane bullying a Xayah or playing a healer alongside her. Small changes to those two. Arcano Staff will probably still be the best here or the best Lost Chapter item, but maybe a bit more of a mid-game power trap. Leave the tempo finally viable. Oracle's Alteration exists, and that is cool. All right, that's it for me. Thanks for watching. You guys are amazing, and I'll see you next time.